The smell of antiseptic clung to the air as Annabelle stood frozen just outside the emergency theater. Her hands clenched so tightly together that her fingers ached. Nurses rushed past her in a blur of blue scrubs and clipped voices, their movements swift and practiced, as if the chaos unfolding around her were routine. To Annabelle, it felt unreal, like a scene she had stepped into by mistake, one that belonged to someone else's life. Sarah lay on the stretcher ahead of them, impossibly small beneath the thin hospital sheets. Her curls were matted with sweat, her lips pale, her chest rising and falling too fast. Annabelle reached out instinctively, brushing her daughter's tiny hand just before the doors swung open and separated them. The doors shut with a finality that made her breath hitch. 3 years. Just 3 years old. Annabelle's mind clung to the number as if it were a shield, replaying memories that refused to stay buried. Sarah's laughter echoing through their small apartment, her habit of crawling into Annabelle's bed before dawn, the way she called her mama with absolute certainty, as though Annabelle were the only safe place in the world. She had promised herself, from the moment she first held Sarah, that nothing would ever harm her. Yet here she was, helpless, watching strangers take her child away. A doctor approached, his expression carefully neutral but his eyes betraying urgency. He spoke quickly, explaining that Sarah had suffered internal injuries and had already lost a dangerous amount of blood. Surgery was necessary immediately. Annabelle nodded through his words, barely hearing them. Her heart pounding so loudly she was sure everyone around her could hear it. "Can I see her?" she asked, her voice trembling. "She's being prepped now," he replied gently. "We need you to stay here." Minutes stretched into something unbearable. Annabelle paced the narrow corridor, her thoughts spiraling between hope and fear. When another doctor joined the first, carrying a clipboard and a grave expression, Annabelle stopped breathing altogether. "We're doing everything we can," the doctor said. "But there's a complication." Annabelle stepped closer, dread settling deep in her chest. "What kind of complication?" He hesitated, then spoke with careful precision. "Your daughter needs an immediate blood transfusion. We tested your blood already. It's not compatible." The words hit her harder than she expected. "Then find someone else," she said quickly. "Anyone, please. We've contacted regional blood banks and nearby facilities," he continued. "We're still searching." Annabelle searched his face, desperate for reassurance, for anything that sounded like certainty. Instead, he exhaled slowly, as if bracing himself for what came next. "Her blood type is extremely rare. None of our stored units are compatible." The words stayed with Annabelle long after the doctor stepped away, echoing in the hollow space behind her ribs. She sank into one of the plastic chairs lining the wall, her body finally giving in to the tremor she had been holding back. As machines beeped somewhere beyond the double doors, her mind drifted, not by choice, but by instinct, back to the life she had built so carefully before everything shattered that morning. Annabelle's days had always begun before sunrise. She would wake to the soft weight of Sarah curled against her side, tiny fingers fisted in the fabric of her nightshirt. Gently, so gently, she would disentangle herself, already calculating the hours ahead. Breakfast to prepare, clothes to iron, emails to answer before her commute even began. Discipline was not something she admired from afar. It was something she lived by because she had no other option. She worked at a small startup tucked into a rented office space above a printing shop, a place that smelled faintly of ink and burnt coffee. The pay was modest, the hours long, but it was stable. Stability mattered. Her coworkers knew her as reliable, quiet, almost painfully organized. They didn't know how many nights she had stayed up teaching herself new skills, how often she had turned down social invitations because daycare fees came first, or how carefully she budgeted every dollar to make sure Sarah never felt the absence of what Annabelle herself had learned to live without. "Mama, look," Sarah would say most mornings, holding up her shoes the wrong way around, pride lighting her face. Annabelle would smile, crouching to fix them. "Almost," she'd say softly. "You're getting there." Those moments, small, ordinary, unremarkable to anyone else, were the anchors of her life. She walked Sarah to preschool herself, rain or shine, gripping her hand tightly as if the world might snatch her away if she loosened her hold. Every goodbye was followed by a kiss on the forehead and a whispered promise. "I'll be back soon." She always came back. There had been no one else. No partner to share the weight of responsibility. No family member to step in when exhaustion pressed too hard against her bones. Even when her mother offered help, Annabelle had learned to say no more often than yes. Independence had become both her armor and her burden. She carried it well, but it was heavy all the same. At night, after Sarah fell asleep, Annabelle would sit at the small dining table, laptop open, planning the next day with meticulous care. Bills were paid on time. Meals were planned for the week. Clothes were folded neatly. There was comfort and control in knowing that she had managed alone for almost 4 years. She had told herself she didn't need anyone, that she was enough. Now, sitting in a hospital corridor with her hands wrapped around each other to keep from shaking, Annabelle felt the fragile truth of that belief crack. For the first time in years, everything she had built, every careful routine, every quiet sacrifice, felt terrifyingly insufficient. She pressed her forehead into her palms and whispered into the empty space between her fingers, "Please, just let her be okay." The hallway offered no answer. Annabelle didn't hear the hospital announcement calling another name, or the wheels of a gurney squealing past. Her mind had already been dragged backward, forced to relive the moment everything went wrong. It had been an ordinary morning, too ordinary to have carried any warning. Sarah had insisted on wearing her yellow dress, the one with the tiny stitched flowers along the hem. Annabelle had protested gently, reminding her it was playground day, but Sarah had crossed her arms and frowned with all the seriousness a 3-year-old could muster. "It makes me happy," she'd said. Annabelle had smiled, smoothing the fabric. "Then that's what you'll wear." She had dropped Sarah off at preschool just after 8, kneeling to fix her hair and reminding her, as she always did, to listen to her teachers and stay with her friends. Sarah had waved, already distracted by the sight of a toy truck on the floor. Annabelle had watched through the glass doors until she disappeared into the classroom, then turned and left, trusting the place she had chosen so carefully. The call came just before noon. Her phone had vibrated on her desk, an unfamiliar number flashing on the screen. Annabelle had hesitated, irritation flaring briefly. She was in the middle of reconciling figures for a client, but something made her answer. "This is Sarah's preschool," a woman's voice said. "Too tight, too fast. There's been an accident." Annabelle stood so abruptly her chair scraped loudly against the floor. "What kind of accident?" There was a lapse in supervision," the woman stammered. Sarah wandered outside the play area. She fell. "How long?" Annabelle demanded. How long was she alone? Silence stretched for a fraction of a second too long. "We didn't notice immediately." Annabelle didn't remember grabbing her bag or shutting down her computer. She remembered the pounding of her heart as she drove, the world blurring at the edges as panic set in. By the time she reached the preschool, the sight waiting for her stole the air from her lungs. Sarah lay on the ground near the back of the building, her small body unnaturally still. Blood stained the concrete beneath her, too much blood, soaking through the yellow dress Annabelle had kissed that morning. A teacher hovered nearby, hands shaking, repeating apologies that fell uselessly into the air. Why wasn't anyone watching her? Annabelle screamed, dropping to her knees beside her daughter. "Why did you leave her alone?" The teacher's voice cracked. "We thought she was with the others. We didn't realize until it was too late." Sarah's eyes fluttered weakly as Annabelle gathered her into her arms, her skin already cooling. "Mama," she whispered, barely audible. "I'm here," Annabelle said, tears spilling freely now. "I've got you. You're okay. You're okay." But she knew even then that Sarah wasn't okay. The ambulance arrived too late to erase the damage. Paramedics worked quickly, voices sharp with urgency as they pressed bandages against wounds that refused to stop bleeding. One of them looked up at Annabelle, his expression grim. "She's lost a lot of blood," he said. "We need to move. Now." Back in the hospital corridor, the memory dissolved into the present. leaving Annabelle gasping as if she'd just surfaced from deep water. Her hands shook violently as she wiped her face, anger and guilt twisting together inside her chest. She had trusted them. She had done everything right. And still, her child lay beyond those doors, fighting for her life because someone hadn't been watching. Doors to the operating theater swung open just long enough for a nurse to step out, her eyes scanning the corridor until they landed on Annabelle. She approached with quick, purposeful strides. "Ms. Annabelle Carter?" she asked. Annabelle was on her feet instantly. "Yes. How is my daughter?" The nurse hesitated, a pause heavy enough to tighten Annabelle's chest. "The doctors need to speak with you. Please." They led her into a small consultation room that smelled faintly of disinfectant and stale coffee. Two doctors stood waiting, one older, his hair threaded with gray, the other younger, his expression tense but controlled. Annabelle gripped the back of a chair, steadying herself as she remained standing. "Your daughter is still in surgery," the older doctor began. "The internal bleeding was more severe than we initially anticipated." Annabelle swallowed hard. "Is she going to live?" "We're doing everything possible," he said carefully. "But she's lost a significant amount of blood. She needs an urgent transfusion to survive the next stage of the procedure." The younger doctor sighed, running a hand through his hair. "We've contacted regional blood banks and nearby hospitals. We've expanded the search." Annabelle leaned forward, bracing her elbows on the table. "How long will that take?" "We don't know," he admitted. "Her blood type is extremely rare." The words slammed into her again, heavier this time. "So what happens if you don't find it?" The older doctor met her gaze steadily. "Then we run out of options." Annabelle's breath came in short, shallow bursts. She stood abruptly, pacing the small room like a trapped animal. "There has to be someone. Somewhere." "We're still searching," the younger doctor said. "Every minute counts." Minutes stretched into an hour. Phones rang. Conversations were murmured in low voices just beyond the door. Annabelle sat hunched forward now, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Each time someone entered the room, hope flared, only to die again when they shook their head. Finally, the older doctor returned, his expression grave in a way Annabelle recognized instinctively. "We've exhausted all immediate options," he said quietly. "None of the available units are compatible." Annabelle stared at him, her mind refusing to absorb the meaning of his words. "So you're telling me," she whispered, "that my daughter is dying because there's no blood?" Silence answered her. She pressed her hands to her mouth, a broken sound escaping before she could stop it. For the first time since Sarah had been born, Annabelle felt something close to despair take hold. Not loud or dramatic, but deep and suffocating. Somewhere behind the walls of the hospital, machines continued to beep, steady and indifferent. And in a sterile room beyond her reach, Sarah waited for blood that did not exist. Annabelle was still sitting in the consultation room when the door opened again. This time, only one doctor entered, the older one. He closed the door behind him with deliberate care, as though he wanted to keep the rest of the world out of what he was about to say. "Ms. Carter," he began, pulling a chair closer but not sitting. "There's something else we need to discuss." Her heart sank. "If this is about paperwork, I don't care. Just tell me where to sign." "This isn't about paperwork," he said quietly. "It's about your daughter's blood." Annabelle lifted her head slowly, every muscle in her body tensing. "You already told me there's no match." "There is a potential match," he corrected. "But it isn't in any blood bank." She laughed weakly, a hollow sound that surprised even her. "Then where is it supposed to come from?" The doctor studied her face, as if gauging how much truth she could withstand. "Your daughter's blood carries a rare inherited marker. It's not just about blood type, it's genetic. The most compatible donor would be someone who shares her exact genetic profile." Annabelle's pulse thudded painfully in her ears. "I don't understand." "The likelihood of finding this match randomly is extremely low," he continued. "In cases like this, the donor is almost always a biological parent." Her chest tightened. "I already told you," My blood doesn't match. Yes, he said gently, which leaves only one other possibility. The room seemed to shrink around her. No, Annabelle whispered, shaking her head before he could even finish. That's not possible. The doctor didn't look away. Sarah's biological father is the most likely compatible donor. Annabelle stood so abruptly the chair scraped loudly against the floor. You're wrong, she said, her voice sharp, almost frantic. You don't know him. You don't know anything about my life. I understand this is overwhelming, the doctor said calmly, hands raised slightly. But medically speaking, I said you're wrong, she snapped. He can't help us. The doctor hesitated, then spoke more firmly. Without his blood, your daughter may not survive. The words hit her like a physical blow. Annabelle stumbled back into the chair, her strength draining away all at once. Her mind raced, memories she had buried clawing their way back to the surface. A man she had erased from her life with ruthless determination. A name she hadn't spoken in years. Justin. No, she whispered again, this time broken. Not him. The doctor's tone softened. We need you to contact him as soon as possible. Time is critical. Annabelle pressed her hands to her temples, breathing unevenly. Panic surged through her, sharp and consuming. She had promised herself she would never do this. Never reopen that door. Never let him back into her world or Sarah's. I can't, she said hoarsely. I swore I wouldn't. The doctor met her gaze with quiet urgency. This isn't about the past. This is about your child. Her child. Annabelle's hands trembled as she reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. The screen lit up, reflecting faintly in her tear-filled eyes. For a long moment, she simply stared at it, memories and fear warring inside her chest. She had built a life without him. She had survived without him. But Sarah might not. With a shaky breath, Annabelle unlocked her phone and scrolled through contacts she hadn't touched in years, stopping at a name she had once loved and learned to fear. Justin. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Your thoughts mean a lot to me. And trust me, the next story will be even better. You won't want to miss it. Turn on the notification bell so you're the first to know.